I expected the usual text banning me from the holiday, but this Easter Sunday, my phone exploded because of the Wall Street Journal. The headline made the whole country club stare at my sister's fiancé like a criminal exposed in broad daylight. That article did not just call me successful. It announced I was dismantling the corrupt system his prestigious family had exploited for decades. I knew their dirty secrets long before the press did. My name is Tessa Monroe, and I was 34 years old when I realized that my family did not just misunderstand me, but that they were actively ashamed of me. I was sitting in my corner office overlooking the Chicago River. The water below was a churning shade of iron gray, matching the sky that hung low over the skyscrapers. It was a Saturday, but the concept of a weekend had ceased to exist for me about 3 years ago. On my dual monitors, I had the pitch deck for our Series B funding round open. We were not asking for pocket change. We were looking for $40 million to scale our operations, and the data in front of me suggested we were going to get it. My finger hovered over the enter key as I adjusted a projection model for the third quarter. The office was silent, save for the hum of the server rack in the climate-controlled room down the hall and the distant wail of a siren on Wacker Drive. I liked the silence. It was clean. It made sense, unlike the notification that just buzzed on my phone, vibrating against the mahogany desk like an angry insect. I glanced down. It was a message from my mother. I usually let family texts sit for an hour or two. It was a boundary I had set years ago, a small wall to keep their chaotic expectations from flooding my workday. But something about the preview text caught my eye. It started with the word Easter, which was tomorrow. I slid the phone closer, unlocking it with Face ID. Mom. Tessa, honey, I was thinking about tomorrow. I waited. The 3 little bubbles appeared and disappeared. She was typing, deleting, and retyping. That was never a good sign. It meant she was trying to package an insult as a favor. Mom, maybe it is best if you do not come to brunch at the club this year. With Brooke and Graham getting so close to the wedding, we really need everything to be perfect. I stared at the screen. The blue light felt sharper than usual. I did not reply immediately. I just let the words settle in my chest. It was not a stab of pain, exactly. It felt more like a dull, familiar ache, like an old fracture that acts up when the weather turns cold. Mom, you know how it is. Graham is a lawyer at a very prestigious firm now. His family is going to be there. They are very traditional people. Margot and Bill usually sit at the head table. I took a sip of my black coffee. It had gone cold. Mom, I just think it might be awkward. You know you still have not really settled into a path that makes sense to people like them. It is hard to explain what you do without it sounding like you are just struggling. We want Brooke to shine. There it was, the struggling narrative. To my mother, success looked like a mahogany office at a law firm, a country club membership, and a husband who wore Brooks Brothers suits. Success was linear. You went to law school. You made partner. You bought a house in Lake Forest. I had started down that path. I had the grades. I had the acceptance letters. And then, 6 years ago, I saw the rot inside the system and walked away to build something else. To them, that was not a pivot. It was a failure. It was me dropping out to play with computers. They still told their friends I was figuring things out or doing freelance computer work. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Brooke. Brooke. Hey, Mom told me she texted you. Please do not make a scene, okay? Graham's senior partners might stop by the table. His family really values image. It is just a different world than what you are used to. We can do a sister dinner next week? My treat. I looked up from the phone and out at the skyline. The wind was whipping against the glass, invisible but powerful. A different world than what I'm used to. I looked around my office. It was sleek, modern, and expensive. The glass walls were soundproof. The chair I sat in cost more than my first car. On the wall behind me, painted in matte black steel, was the logo they never bothered to look at closely: Clearhaven Analytics. They thought I was fixing laptops or running a small IT help desk. They had never once asked to see the financials. They never asked who our clients were. If they had, They might have recognized the names of the Fortune 500 companies that paid us millions of dollars to clean up their internal messes. But they did not ask. They just assumed. I typed my reply. My thumbs moved with a steady, practiced rhythm. I did not defend myself. I did not tell them that my struggle had just landed a contract that would likely double the company's valuation by Christmas. I did not tell them that I had 40 employees who depended on my leadership. I wrote, "Okay, have fun." Then I went to the group settings and hit mute. Silence returned to the room. It was heavy, but it was mine. I stood up and walked to the window, crossing my arms over my chest. I remembered the last family gathering I attended. It was Christmas. Graham had been there, holding court in the living room, swirling a glass of scotch and talking about a merger his firm was handling. He had used words like leverage and compliance with the unearned confidence of a man who had never actually read the raw data files. When I had tried to chime in, mentioning that automated compliance audits were becoming the industry standard, Graham had chuckled. He actually patted my shoulder. "That is cute, Tessa," he had said, "but real law is about relationships. It is not something you can code into a little app." My mother had laughed. Brooke had beamed at him, proud to be attached to such a sharp mind. Cute. They saw me as a distinct lack of potential, a loose end, a stain on the pristine tablecloth of their social standing. They wanted a perfect Easter picture. They wanted pastels and pearls and polite conversation about summer homes. They did not want the daughter who asked too many questions and did not have a husband to validate her existence. I turned back to my desk. My calendar notification popped up on the second monitor, signaling my agenda for the coming week. Tuesday, April 2nd, 10 in the morning. Interview, The Wall Street Journal. Topic, The Hidden Economy of Legal Billing Fraud. I stared at the entry. I had not told them. I had not told anyone outside of my co-founder, Nolan, and our own legal team. My mother was worried about explaining my job to a few local lawyers at a country club brunch. She was worried I would embarrass them by being vague. She had no idea that come Tuesday, I would not need to explain anything. The front page of the business section was going to do it for me. The journalist, a sharp-witted woman named Elena, had spent 3 months verifying the data I gave her. We were not talking about a fluff piece. This was an exposé. We were about to reveal how a specific network of high-end law firms, including the one Graham worked for, had been systematically inflating billable hours and burying phantom fees in complex corporate contracts. And the source of that data? The little app Graham had laughed at. Clearhaven. Analytics had not just found the fraud, we had mapped it, we had quantified it, and now we were going to publish it. I picked up my phone one last time. I looked at the muted thread. Mom, thanks for understanding. Sweetie, it is just for the best. I set the phone face down on the desk. You are right, Mom, I said to the empty room, my voice flat and cold. It is for the best. Let them have their Easter. Let them have their mimosas, and their ham, and their false sense of security. Let Graham preen in his tailored suit, shaking hands with partners, thinking he owns the world because he knows which fork to use for the salad. I sat back down in my chair and pulled the keyboard closer. I had work to do. The funding deck needed to be perfect. The data needed to be unimpeachable. They wanted a proper image? Fine, I would give them an image, but it would not be me smiling politely in a floral dress. It would be my name in bold print, right next to the evidence that would tear their precious, polite world apart. I opened the file and began to type. The only sound in the room was the aggressive, rapid-fire click of my mechanical keys, sounding like gunshots in the quiet office. 6 years ago, I was not sitting in a corner office. I was sitting in a cubicle the size of a dog crate at a mid-tier risk management firm, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes felt like they were bleeding. That was where I first saw the pattern. It was not a dramatic heist. Nobody was wiring millions of dollars to the Cayman Islands in the middle of the night. It was much more boring, and therefore, much more effective. I was analyzing quarterly expenditure reports for a logistics company when I noticed a recurring line item labeled simply as Strategic Consultation. It appeared every month from 3 different legal vendors. The amounts were never large enough to trigger an automatic audit, usually between $4,000 and $7,000, but they were constant. I ran a script to cross-reference these charges against the actual case logs. There was zero correlation. The company was paying for hours that were physically impossible to bill given the active litigation files. They were being bled dry. One polite invoice at a time. When I took this to my division head, he barely looked up from his sandwich. He told me that legal fees were subjective and that I should focus on supply chain waste. He told me I was overthinking it. That was the moment the idea for Clear Haven was born. I realized there was no software on the market that could read the narrative of a legal bill. There was nothing that could flag when a partner charged $600 an hour for work that a paralegal could do, or when 3 lawyers billed for a conference call that only 2 attended. I went home that weekend, vibrating with the energy of discovery. I had a business plan. I had a vision. We were at my parents' house for Sunday dinner. The roast beef was dry, and the conversation was drier. I waited for a lull. Then I laid it out. I told them I was going to quit my safe, salaried job to build an algorithm that detected billing fraud in the professional services sector. My father paused, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and mild pity. "So," he said slowly, "it is computer work, like IT support?" "No," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "It is data analytics. It is forensic accounting driven by machine learning." My mother chimed in then. She smiled, but it was that tight, strained smile she used when a neighbor's dog barked too loudly. "But Tessa, you have benefits. You have a 401k. Why would you leave that to Chase? Glitches?" Then she turned immediately to Brooke. "Brooke, tell your father what Professor Holloway said about your mock trial performance." Brooke lit up like a neon sign. She was in her 2nd year of law school then. She launched into a story about how she had destroyed a witness on cross-examination. My parents leaned in, captivated. They understood this. Law was prestigious. Law was suits and courtrooms and power. Law was something they could brag about at the club. My algorithm was just invisible math. When I finally put in my notice 2 weeks later, my father asked me exactly one question. "Are you sure?" He did not wait for the answer. He just sighed. The sound of a man who had decided to lower his expectations to avoid future disappointment. That was the last time they asked about my work with any genuine curiosity. I did not have time to mourn their indifference. I was too busy drowning. I found Nolan Price on a hacker forum. He was a back-end engineer who wrote code like poetry and had the social skills of a hermit crab. We pooled our savings, which amounted to roughly $12,000, and rented a windowless room in a shared workspace in the West Loop that smelled permanently of stale popcorn. For the first 18 months, Nolan and I lived a life that would have horrified my mother. We did not have brunch. We had energy drinks and cold pizza. We slept on second-hand office chairs. I remember waking up one Tuesday morning with the imprint of a keyboard on my cheek, stiff and freezing because the building cut the heat at night to save money. We built the model from scratch. We fed it thousands of public court dockets and redacted invoices. We taught it to read. We taught it to spot the difference between a legitimate motion to dismiss and a 3-hour strategy session that took place on a golf course. But the technology was the easy part. The market was the wall we kept smashing our faces against. During that first year, we pitched to 20 different corporate counsels. We were rejected 20 times. It was not because the product did not work. It worked perfectly. The problem was fear. I remember sitting in a glass-walled conference room with the general counsel of a mid-sized manufacturing firm. I showed him a demo. I showed him how our software could save his department 15% of their annual legal spend. He looked nervous. He kept glancing at the door. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "these firms, we have relationships with them. If I start running their bills through a fraud detector, they will take it as an insult. They might drop us. I cannot risk losing their representation." That was when I understood the true nature of the beast I was fighting. The legal industry was not just selling advice, it was selling insurance. It was selling fear. Clients were terrified to question the bill because they were terrified of the law. They paid the premium because they did not want to rock the boat. My family thought I was failing. Every time I saw them, they would ask if I had found a real job yet. Brooke was landing summer associate positions at top firms, bringing home stories of signing bonuses and client dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. I was wearing the same blazer I had bought 3 years prior, trying to convince people to save money they did not want to save. But failure clarifies things. As the rejections piled up, I stopped trying to sell a savings tool. I started looking deeper into the data we were collecting. I spent nights analyzing the rejection patterns. I looked at the metadata of the invoices we had managed to get our hands on. I started to see something darker than just padding hours. I saw coordination. I saw identical billing narratives appearing from different firms for the same client on the same dates. I saw document review fees that were time-stamped for hours when the document management system showed zero activity. I saw lawyers billing for 26 hours in a single day. I realized that some of these firms were not just greedy, they were lazy. They were using templates for their billing just as they used templates for their contracts. That was the turning point. I stopped sleeping on the chair because I was tired. I stopped sleeping because I was obsessed. I told Nolan to change the architecture of our database. We stopped just scanning for errors. We started archiving everything. If a firm sent a PDF invoice, we stripped the metadata, we logged the author, the creation time, the modification history. We tracked who emailed it, who CC'd whom, and how many times the file size changed. We built a digital vault that did not just tell us what was billed, but how the bill was constructed. I began to treat every invoice not as a request for payment, but as a piece of evidence in a crime that had not been prosecuted yet. I learned to think like a prosecutor. I established a chain of custody for every byte of data that entered our system. If we were going to go to war with the most litigious people on the planet, we could not just be right, we had to be bulletproof. While my sister was learning how to bill a client for a 10-minute phone call, I was building the machine that would eventually prove she was lying about the duration of that call. My family saw a woman who could not afford a decent apartment. They saw a dropout who was wasting her potential. They did not see that I was no longer building a business, I was building an arsenal. And 6 years later, standing in my high-rise office, I knew that the ammunition I had stockpiled in the dark was finally ready to be fired in the light. It was about 8 months ago that Brooke finally brought the Messiah home for dinner. That was not what she called him. Of course, she called him Graham Keene, but from the way my mother had been hyperventilating over the floral arrangements for 3 days prior, you would have thought we were hosting a visiting dignitary or a minor deity. Graham was an associate at Ridgewell and Sloan. In the hierarchy of Chicago law firms, Ridgewell was the kind of place that had mahogany paneling older than the Constitution and a billing structure that could bankrupt a small country by lunchtime. When he walked through the door of my parents' house in Lake Forest, I understood immediately why Brooke had chosen him. He was not just a person, he was an accessory that matched her life goals perfectly. He was tall, with the kind of hairline that suggested good genetics and expensive haircuts. He wore a navy suit that fit him with suspicious precision, and he shook my father's hand with a grip that I am sure he had practiced in a mirror. My father, who usually greeted guests with a grunt and a nod, actually beamed. He clapped Graham on the shoulder. "Welcome to the family, son," Dad said. They had not even served the appetizers yet, and already, Graham was the son he had always wanted. I stood by the staircase, holding a glass of lukewarm white wine, watching the tableau. I felt like an anthropologist observing a tribe perform a ritual sacrifice, except the sacrifice was their own dignity. Dinner was a masterclass in performative conversation. We sat in the formal dining room, a room we used maybe twice a year. My mother had brought out the good china, the plates with the gold rims that we were forbidden to touch as children. Graham did not just talk, he broadcasted. He had a way of speaking that made everything sound like a closing argument. He did not say he liked the wine. He said the vintage showed remarkable character and integrity. He dominated the airspace with words that were designed to exclude anyone who was not in the club. He talked about institutional reputation and traditional standards and the sanctity of the partnership track. You know, Bill, Graham said to my father, swirling his Cabernet like he was auditioning for a commercial. At Ridgewell, we believe that the law is the bedrock of civilization. It is about maintaining order. It is about protecting the legacy of our clients. We do not just take cases, we cultivate networks. My father nodded aggressively, chewing his steak. Exactly. Integrity. That is what is missing these days. Too many people looking for shortcuts. My mother looked at Graham with eyes that were practically glazing over with adoration. It is so refreshing to hear a young man speak with such respect for tradition. Isn't it, Tessa? The question was a trap. If I agreed, I was a hypocrite. If I disagreed, I was the black sheep ruining the dinner. It is certainly a specific worldview, I said, keeping my face neutral. Graham turned his gaze toward me. It was the first time he had really looked at me all evening. His eyes were a pale, watery blue, and they swept over me with a quick, efficient assessment. He looked at my haircut, my simple blouse, the lack of expensive jewelry. I could practically hear the cash register in his head ringing up a total of 0. Brooke tells me you are in tech, Graham said. The way he said tech sounded like he was talking about sanitation work. Before I could answer, Brooke interjected. She was sitting next to him, her hand resting possessively on his forearm. She looked terrified that I might say something real. Oh, Tessa does data stuff, Brooke said quickly, her laugh brittle. You know, analysis. It is a little startup thing, very niche. Startup thing. I felt a small, cold smile touch my lips. My company had just closed a contract with a multinational insurance firm the week prior, but to Brooke, I was still playing with toys. Graham smiled, a polite stretching of lips that did not reach his eyes. Interesting, he said. I have seen a lot of that lately. Everyone wants to disrupt the industry. But you know, Tessa, finance and law are ancient disciplines. They operate on trust. They are not really environments for people who like to break the rules. The table went quiet. It was a subtle dig, wrapped in velvet, but it landed hard. He was telling me that I did not belong. He was establishing the hierarchy. He was the guardian of the gates, and I was the barbarian trying to climb the walls. My mother looked nervous. She started to reach for the butter dish, perhaps to distract us. I set my wine glass down. I looked Graham directly in the eyes. I did not blink. You are right, Graham. I said. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with the tension in the room. I do not break the rules. I actually love the rules. That is why I built a system to make sure everyone is actually following them. I do not break anything. I just shine a light into the dark places where people think no one is looking. For a second, the mask slipped. It was a micro-expression, lasting less than a heartbeat. A flicker of annoyance, perhaps even alarm, twitched at the corner of his mouth. He did not like the metaphor. He did not like the idea of lights in dark places. Then, the professional veneer slammed back into place. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. Well, he said, turning back to my father, everyone needs a hobby. Speaking of lights, Bill, have you seen the new lighting fixtures they installed at the club? The renovation committee finally approved the budget. He changed the subject with the ease of a man who had spent his entire adult life dodging direct questions. My parents happily followed his lead, eager to discuss the country club renovations, leaving my comment to die on the vine. But I did not let it go. I watched him. For the rest of the meal, I observed Graham Keene with the same scrutiny my software applied to a suspicious invoice. I noticed things. I noticed that whenever the conversation drifted toward money, specifically, how lawyers billed their time, he got fidgety. My father made a joke about lawyers charging for thinking in the shower, and Graham's laugh was too loud, too forced. Later, over dessert, I decided to poke the bear one more time. It must be stressful, I said casually, stabbing a piece of cheesecake. With the new transparency regulations coming out next year, I read that corporate clients are demanding independent audits of their legal fees now. Does Ridgewell have a protocol for that? This time, he dropped his fork. It clattered against the china, a sharp, jarring noise in the quiet room. He picked it up quickly, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. "We have the utmost trust with our clients," Graham said, his voice dropping an octave. "We do not need third-party auditors to tell us how to do our jobs. Those audits are usually just bureaucratic nonsense, a waste of time." "Is that so?" I asked. "I would think if everything was accurate, an audit would be a chance to prove it. Transparency is usually good for business, isn't it?" Graham stared at me. The polite disinterest was gone. In its place was something cold and sharp. He looked at me not as a sister-in-law, but as opposing counsel. He looked at me like I was a threat. "Tessa," my mother warned, her voice tight, "let us not talk shop." "Right," Graham said. He took a long sip of his coffee. "Let us focus on happy things." Brooke and I were thinking about a summer wedding. The tension dissolved as my mother and sister shrieked with delight, launching into a discussion about venues and florists, but I sat back in my chair, watching the perfect lawyer. I saw the way his hand shook slightly as he set the coffee cup down. I saw the way he avoided looking at me for the rest of the night. He was afraid. He was a man who had built a life on the assumption that no one would ever check his math. He relied on the prestige of his firm and the ignorance of his clients to shield him from scrutiny. He talked about tradition, because tradition was a convenient cover for lack of accountability. As I drove home that night, leaving the warmth of the Lake Forest estate for my quiet apartment in the city, I realized something. My family thought I was jealous. They thought I disliked Graham because he represented the success I had supposedly failed to achieve. They thought I was bitter. But that was not it. I disliked him because I recognized him. I had seen his digital footprint in 1,000 different datasets. I knew his type. He was the kind of man who billed 25 hours in a 24-hour day. He was the kind of man who buried a $50,000 consultation fee in a merger agreement because he knew the client would be too overwhelmed to ask what it was for. And now, months later, staring at the text message banning me from Easter, the pieces clicked together with the satisfying snap of a deadlock seal. "Mom, Graham's family really values image." That was a lie, or at least, it was only half the truth. They did not just want to skip Easter because I was awkward or because I didn't have a husband. They wanted me gone because Graham had sensed something that night at the dinner table. He had sensed that I was the one person in that room who could see through his suit and his jargon. He did not know about the Wall Street Journal article. He did not know about the investigation, but his survival instinct was sharp. He knew that I was a predator in his ecosystem, even if he did not know exactly when I would strike. I looked at the skip Easter text one more time. "Okay," I thought, "you want to protect your image. You want to hide behind the wall of your prestige." I smiled, a genuine smile this time. He thought banning me from brunch would keep him safe. He thought that if I wasn't there to make snide comments about audits, his world would remain secure. He had no idea that while he was eating ham and judging my career choices, I was about to turn on the floodlights, 3 months before the Easter invitation arrived. Clearhaven Analytics landed the contract that would change everything. We had signed a master service agreement with massive private equity firm based in New York. They managed a portfolio of 40 different companies ranging from mid-sized manufacturing plants to healthcare software providers. They were bleeding money in operational costs, and they hired us to find out where the cash was going. They thought we were looking for supply chain redundancies or duplicate software licenses. They had no idea we were about to walk into a crime scene. The data ingestion took 2 weeks. We pulled 5 years of invoicing history from 40 different accounting systems. We normalized the data, cleaned up the formatting, and fed it into the beast. That was what Nolan called our central processing model, the beast. I was the one who was manning the console when the first red flag popped up. It was a Tuesday night, close to 11 o'clock. I was drinking my third espresso, watching the visualization map on the main screen. The software was designed to draw lines between similar billing entities. Usually, this looked like a spider web. Companies share vendors all the time. Everyone uses the same shipping companies, the same cloud storage providers, the same office supply chains. But then I saw a cluster that did not make sense. It was a thick, dark knot of connections linking 12 completely unrelated portfolio companies. The common denominator was not a supplier. It was a group of 3 law firms. One of them was Ridgewell and Sloan. I sat up straight, the fatigue vanishing instantly. I zoomed in on the data. The model had flagged a pattern we call a linguistic match. We teach the AI to read the narrative descriptions on invoices, the little paragraphs where lawyers explain what they did to earn their $600 an hour. I pulled up 2 invoices side by side. Invoice A was for a trucking company in Ohio. Invoice B was for a medical device startup in Austin. The dates were 6 months apart. The law firms were different, but the text under the line item for Strategic Advisory Services was identical, word for word. It was a paragraph about mitigating cross-jurisdictional liability through proactive framework assessment. It was a stock phrase, a template. I started digging deeper. I ran a query for that specific phrase across the entire dataset of 40 companies. It appeared 215 times. In every single instance, the bill was for a round number, $5,000, $10,000, never $4,950, always a clean, flat fee. And in every single instance, the time logs associated with these fees were impossible. I found a partner at a firm in Boston who had billed for on-site strategy meetings in 3 different cities on the same day, unless he had invented teleportation. He was lying. But the fraud went deeper than just lazy billing. As I traced the flow of cases, I saw the routing. When the trucking company had a labor dispute, their primary counsel referred them to a specific specialist at Ridgewell and Sloan. When the medical device company had a patent issue, Ridgewell and Sloan referred them back to a partner at the first firm. It was a carousel. They were passing clients back and forth like poker chips, generating fees for unnecessary consultations, document reviews that never happened, and strategy sessions that were nothing more than expensive lunches. They were not just overcharging, they were farming the clients. I knew I had to be careful. If I went to the private equity firm and screamed fraud, the lawyers would descend on me like vultures. They would claim it was a glitch. They would claim I did not understand the nuance of legal privilege. They would sue Clearhaven into oblivion before I could print a single report. I followed the protocol strictly. I generated a preliminary finding report. I stripped out the names of the specific partners but left the firms and the amounts visible. I flagged the impossible hours, the days where individuals billed more than 24 hours in a single calendar day. I sent the encrypted file to the chief compliance officer of the private equity firm with a note that was deliberately understated. Potential anomalies detected in external counsel invoicing. Suggest immediate independent audit of highlighted vendors. The response was silence for 3 days. Then, my phone rang. It was not the client. "This is Elena Rossi," the voice said. "I am a reporter with the Wall Street Journal." My heart hammered against my ribs. I had not called the press. I was careful. But the world of high finance is smaller than people think. People talk. Assistants talk. "I am not sure how you got this number," I said, my voice steady. "But I cannot discuss client business." "I do not want you to discuss a client," Elena said. She sounded tired, sharp, and impatient. "I want to discuss a pattern. I have been tracking a story for 6 months about inflated legal costs in the mergers and acquisitions sector. I have sources telling me that there is a system, a back-end handshake deal between major firms to keep billable hours artificially high during restructuring." I said nothing. "I heard a rumor," she continued, "that a certain analytics firm in Chicago just flagged a massive irregularity in a private equity portfolio. I heard you have the math." I walked to the window of my office. The river below was black and oily. "If I talk to you," I said, "it has to be on background first. And if we go on the record, I will only confirm data that has been scrubbed of client identifiers. I am not going to breach my non-disclosure agreements." "Fine," she said, "but I need to see the mechanism. I need to understand how they are doing it." We met 2 days later in a diner on the outskirts of the city, far away from the glass towers of the Loop. I brought a tablet with a sanitized version of the model. I showed her the linguistic matches. I showed her the timestamps. I showed her the graph that looked like a spider web, proving that these firms were not competing for business. They were colluding to share the spoils. Elena looked at the screen for a long time. She did not take notes. She just absorbed it. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. She did not look like a reporter chasing a scoop anymore. She looked like someone who had just found a bomb. "This is not a tech story," she said quietly. "You understand that, right?" I thought I was writing a piece about efficiency software. But this is an ecosystem being exposed. You are showing that the guardians of the system are the ones looting it. "Can you print it?" I asked. "I can print it," she said, "but I need to verify the specific firms. I need to reach out to them for comment. That is going to trigger a war." "Let them fight," I said. "I have the receipts." We spent the next week going back and forth with my own legal counsel. We made sure that every claim I made was backed by metadata. We made sure that Clear Haven was protected. I was not going to be the whistleblower who got crushed. I was going to be the expert witness who brought the gavel down. On Wednesday, Elena sent me a secure message. "We are running it. The editors cleared the story. It is going on the front page of the business section." "When?" I asked. "Sunday," she replied. "It hits the digital edition at 6 in the morning and the print edition hits the stands by 7. I looked at the calendar on my wall. Sunday, April 1st. Easter Sunday. I stared at the date. It was almost comical. The day of resurrection. The day my family would be gathering at the country club, dressed in their Sunday best, sipping mimosas and pretending that appearance was the only thing that mattered. My mother had asked me to stay away to protect their image. She wanted a perfect, quiet holiday where no one asked difficult questions. Fate, it seemed, had a different plan. I did not choose the date. The editorial calendar of the Wall Street Journal was a machine that moved with its own logic. But as I sat there, looking at the notification from Elena, I felt a cold sense of satisfaction settle in my gut. I imagined Graham walking into the club. I imagined him shaking hands, feeling secure in his prestige. I imagined the moment he would walk past the newsstand in the lobby, or the moment a senior partner would check his phone and see the notification. The article would not name him personally, not yet, but it would name Ridgewell and Sloan. It would describe the exact billing practices that paid for his tailored suits and his expensive watch. It would tell the world that the tradition he loved so much was actually a racketeering scheme wrapped in a silk tie. I picked up my phone. I saw the group chat where my family was discussing the brunch menu. "Brooke, make sure we get the table by the window. Graham loves the view." I did not type anything. I just watched the screen, knowing that the view Graham was about to get was going to be very different from the one he expected. I turned off my monitor. I packed my bag. I was going to have a very quiet Easter. I would make myself a cup of coffee, sit on my balcony, and watch the sunrise. And while I sat in silence, across town, the truth was going to start screaming. The Friday before Easter dragged on with a strange, heavy quietness, the kind of silence that usually precedes a tornado siren. My phone sat on the edge of my desk, face up. I had not blocked my mother yet. Part of me, the part that was still a little girl wanting approval, kept hoping for a retraction. I kept hoping for a message that said, "Just kidding. We want you there. We love you." But when the screen finally lit up at 3 in the afternoon, it was not an apology. It was a justification. "Mom, honey, please do not be angry. It is just, when people ask you what you do, it is hard to say, you know? Everyone else has titles. Lawyer, doctor, vice president. Freelance analyst just sounds so vague. I do not want you to feel out of place." I read the text twice. Hard to say. I looked at the folder on my desk containing the final draft of the Wall Street Journal article. The headline was bold and clear. There was nothing vague about it. My title was listed as CEO and founder. The valuation of my company was listed in the tens of millions. But to my mother, If she could not explain it in 5 seconds to a woman wearing a Chanel suit, it did not exist. She was not protecting me from feeling out of place. She was protecting herself from the awkwardness of having a daughter who did not fit the template. I picked up the phone. I did not type out the angry paragraph that was screaming in my head. I did not list my accomplishments. I did not tell her that the vague work I did was currently terrifying the very people she was trying to impress. I typed, "Rest assured, Mom, I will not make anyone hard to talk to." It was a sentence with a double meaning she would never catch. She would read it as submission. I wrote it as a promise. I was not going to make conversation difficult because I was not going to be there. And after Sunday, no one was going to be asking her what I did. They were going to be telling her. A few minutes later, my sister decided to twist the knife. Brooke sent a photo to our family group chat. It was a picture of the physical invitation for the Easter brunch at the club, resting on a table next to a vase of white lilies. The card was cream-colored cardstock with gold-embossed lettering. "Brooke, look at the guest list for the head table. Judge Harrison is coming, and the senior partner from Graham's firm, Mr. Sterling. It is going to be such a power lunch." I zoomed in on the photo. I saw the names. Judge Harrison, Arthur Sterling, the Keene family. It was a roster of the local elite, the people who made the rules, the people who assumed they were untouchable. Arthur Sterling was the managing partner of Ridgewell and Sloan. His name appeared in my database over 400 times. He was the signatory on 3 of the most egregious consulting contracts I had flagged for the Journal. Brooke was bragging about eating lunch with a man who was essentially robbing his clients blind, and she thought it was a badge of honor. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. It was not sadness anymore. It was just a profound tiredness of the charade. "Tessa, looks great. Have fun." I hit send. Then I went into the settings and turned off notifications for the entire weekend. I looked up to find Nolan standing in the doorway of my office. He was holding a tablet and chewing on a bagel. He looked disheveled, as always, wearing a hoodie that had seen better days. He was the antithesis of the country club crowd, and I trusted him with my life. "I saw your phone blowing up," Nolan said, leaning against the doorframe. "Family stuff?" "They asked me to skip Easter," I said, keeping my voice neutral. My presence ruins the aesthetic. Nolan stopped chewing. He stared at me for a long moment. "They kicked you out?" "Politely disinvited," I corrected. "Apparently, my job is too embarrassing to explain to Graham's lawyer friends." Nolan let out a short, sharp laugh. He walked over and dropped the tablet on my desk. "Do they know?" he asked. "Do they have any idea that in 48 hours, you are going to be the most talked about person in their entire industry?" "No," I said, "they do not." "So tell them," Nolan said, throwing his hands up. "Send them the PDF of the article proof. Tell them to save you a seat at the head table because you are about to be famous. Why are you letting them treat you like this?" I spun my chair around to face the window. The city was beginning to light up as the afternoon faded into evening. "Because if I tell them now," I said softly, "they will only want me there because I am powerful. They will invite the CEO of Clear Haven. They won't be inviting Tessa." I turned back to look at him. "I do not have the obligation to prove my value to people who only love me when I am winning." I said, "If they cannot respect me when I am just a freelance analyst, they do not deserve to sit with me when I'm on the front page." Nolan nodded slowly. He understood. He had seen me build this from nothing. He knew that the victory wasn't the money or the fame. The victory was the work. "Fair enough," he said, "but you are going to miss the look on their faces." "I have an imagination," I said. Nolan turned to leave, but then he paused. "Oh, before I forget," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "We got a weird ping on the public contact form. It bypassed the spam filter because it was sent from a high-security encrypted server. I forwarded it to your inbox." I frowned. "What does it say?" "It is short," Nolan said. "Read it." I opened my email client. The message was at the top. The subject line was blank. The sender was a random string of alphanumeric characters from a secure Proton mail domain. I clicked on it. Body. You are poking at things you do not understand. If you want your family to stay comfortable, stop sharing files with reporters. We know where you live. We know where your sister is getting married. Kill the story." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I stared at the words, "We know where your sister is getting married." It was a standard intimidation tactic, vague enough to be deniable, specific enough to be terrifying. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have called the reporter and begged to retract the quotes. But I was not a normal person. I was a data analyst. I did not feel fear. I felt validation. "Nolan," I called out. He was already halfway down the hall. He poked his head back in. "Yeah?" "This is not a threat," I said, my voice steady. "This is a confirmation." "What do you mean?" "If we were wrong," I said, "they would have ignored us. If our data was flawed, they would have waited for the article to come out and then sued us for libel. They would be laughing at us." I pointed at the screen. "They are sending threats because they know we are right. They are panicked. This means we hit the vein." I forwarded the email immediately to our external legal counsel. Then I opened the raw header data of the email. "I want you to log this," I told Nolan. "Track the routing. Even encrypted mail leaves footprints if you look at the packet loss patterns. I want this added to the evidence pile. If anything happens to me or my family, I want this linked directly to Ridgewell and Sloan's IP block." "On it," Nolan said. He did not look scared either. He looked ready to hunt. I sat back in my chair. The email was meant to silence me. Instead, it had just ensured that I would never, ever stop. The irony was rich. They were threatening my family to get me to back down. They did not realize that my family had already removed me from the equation. They were using leverage that did not exist. I could not be blackmailed with the safety of a reputation I was already excluded from. I looked at my phone one last time. "Have fun," I had told them. I made a decision then. I would not go to the club. I would not crash the party. I would not make a scene. I would stay in my apartment on Easter Sunday. I would order Thai food. I would wear sweatpants. I would turn off my phone. Let them have their perfect brunch. Let Graham preen in his suit. Let my mother explain away my absence with a polite lie about me being busy with a small project. They were going to sit there, eating glazed ham and drinking champagne, surrounded by the very people whose corruption was about to be exposed. They were going to celebrate their status in a world that was already crumbling beneath their feet. I was not going to be at the table. But the truth was going to be the uninvited guest that no one could ignore. I closed my laptop. I was done working. The article was locked. The presses were running. The fuse was lit. All that was left to do was wait for the boom. Easter Sunday arrived with a sunrise that was almost aggressively beautiful. The sky over Lake Michigan was a bruised purple that lightened into a crisp, cold gold. It was the kind of morning designed for bonnets, pastel suits, and the quiet satisfaction of the wealthy. I was wearing sweatpants and an oversized university hoodie. I sat on my kitchen island with a French press of coffee and my iPad. The apartment was silent. At exactly 6 a.m, the silence was broken not by a church bell, but by the soft ping of a notification from the Wall Street Journal app. I swiped the screen to unlock it. There it was, above the fold. The billion-dollar blindfold. How corporate law's black box billing is bleeding American business dry. Below the headline was a graphic. It was a simplified version of the visualization I had built with Nolan. Red lines connected anonymous law firms to major corporate entities, forming a web of redundant fees and shadow contracts. And right in the center of the text, bold and undeniable, was the name of the source. According to data analysis provided by Clearhaven Analytics, a Chicago-based forensic auditing firm. I took a sip of coffee. It was hot, bitter, and perfect. I began to read. Elena had done a masterful job. She did not write a dry financial report. She wrote a crime story. She described ghost hours, billed by lawyers who were on vacation. She detailed the practice of double dipping, where senior partners billed 2 different clients for the same hour of work. She did not name Graham personally. That would have been libelous without a criminal conviction, But she did something worse. She named the firms that were currently subject to enhanced scrutiny by federal regulators and client auditors. Ridgewell and Sloan. It was listed third. The article explicitly mentioned that Ridgewell and Sloan was being investigated for a pattern of circular consultation fees involving their junior partner track. I checked the time. It was 6:15. The brunch at the country club was scheduled to start at 11, but I knew the way these people worked. My father would be up early, reading the papers on his tablet. Graham would be checking the news to see if his firm had been mentioned in any merger announcements. I set the iPad down and waited. The first vibration came at 6:32. It was a LinkedIn notification. Arthur Sterling viewed your profile. I smiled. The managing partner of Graham's firm was awake, and he was hunting. By 7 o'clock, my phone was no longer sitting still. It was buzzing and vibrating across the marble countertop like it was possessed. Calls from unknown numbers. Text messages from former colleagues I had not spoken to in 5 years. Emails flooding my inbox with subject lines like interview request and comment on Ridgewell allegations. And then, the family ringtone cut through the noise. It was my mother. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted her to sit with the feeling of the phone connecting. I wanted her to have a moment to remember the text she had sent me on Friday, telling me I was too hard to explain. I answered on the 4th ring. "Hello, Mother. Happy Easter." "Tessa?" Her voice was breathless, high-pitched, bordering on a screech. "Tessa, is this you?" "Is what me?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "The paper," she hissed. I could hear the echo of the bathroom tiles. She was hiding. She had probably locked herself in the master bath to make this call. "Your father is reading the Wall Street Journal. There is a company named Clear Haven. It says the CEO is Tessa Monroe. That is you? That is your little computer thing?" "It is an analytics firm, Mom," I said calmly. "And yes, that is me." "Oh my God," she whispered. It wasn't pride. It was terrified awe. "They are saying, Tessa, the article says this company has exposed a massive fraud. It says you are working with the Department of Justice." "We cooperate with regulators. Yes," I said. "Is there a problem?" "Is there a problem?" Her voice rose again. "We are getting dressed for the club. Do you know who is going to be there? Arthur Sterling is going to be there. Graham says his firm is mentioned in the article. He is pacing around the kitchen like a maniac. He says this article is a hit piece. If they haven't done anything wrong, they have nothing to worry about," I said. "It is just data. Mom, numbers don't lie." "You did not tell us," she accused. "You let us treat you like you were unemployed, and you were doing this?" "You asked me not to come today because I would be embarrassing," I reminded her. "You said my job was hard to explain. I figured the Wall Street Journal could explain it for me. Is it clear now?" There was a silence on the line. Heavy, suffocating silence. "We have to go," she said, her voice trembling. "We have to go to the brunch. We can't not show up. It would look like an admission of guilt." "Have a lovely time," I said. "Try the quiche." I hung up. The sun was fully up now, flooding my apartment with light. I felt lighter, too. The secret I had been carrying for 6 years was gone. At 11:30, the real show began. I could picture the scene at the country club perfectly. The round tables with white linens, the centerpieces of tulips and daffodils, the servers moving silently with trays of champagne, and the undercurrent of panic rippling through the room as phones were checked under the tables. My phone rang again. This time it was Brooke. I put it on speaker and set it down while I buttered a piece of toast. "Tessa!" She was crying, not the polite, dab your eyes crying. This was the ugly, gasping sobbing of a woman whose carefully constructed reality had just been hit by a wrecking ball. "Hello, Brooke," I said. "You did this on purpose!" she screamed. I could hear background noise, clinking silverware, the murmur of a crowd. She had stepped away from the table, but not far enough. You knew we were coming here today. Everyone is looking at us. Tessa, everyone." "Are they?" I took a bite of toast. Why? Because Mr. Sterling just got up and left, she wailed. He checked his phone, turned white, and walked out without saying a word to Graham. And then Judge Harrison came over. He came over to our table, Tessa, and I thought he was going to say hello. But he looked at Graham and said, "I hope your files are in order, son." And then he walked away. I felt a cold thrill of satisfaction. Judge Harrison was one of the few honest men on the bench. He must have read the morning briefing. "That sounds stressful," I said. "Stressful? Graham is hyperventilating," Brooke shouted. "He is in the men's locker room throwing up. He says you are ruining him. He says you used family secrets to build your model. Did you? Did you spy on him?" "I used public data." "Brooke," I said, my voice hardening. "I used the invoices his firm sent to my clients. If Graham's name is attached to fraud, that is because Graham signed the documents. I didn't put the pen in his hand." "You are my sister," she sobbed. "You are supposed to be on my side. How am I supposed to walk back into that dining room? Everyone is whispering. I can feel them staring at my ring." "You wanted a life of image, Brooke," I said. "You wanted to marry a man because he looked good on paper. Well, now you are seeing the rest of the paper. This is what the prestige costs." "I hate you," she hissed. "Mom is crying in the lobby. Dad is trying to pay the check so we can leave. But the machine is taking forever. You ruined Easter. You ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything," I said. "I just turned on the lights." She hung up. I sat there for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I felt a twinge of sadness, but it was distant, like looking at a photograph of a house you used to live in but doesn't exist anymore. They were not angry because I had done something unethical. They were angry because I had embarrassed them. They were grieving their social standing, not their relationship with me. Then the text came. It was from Graham. "Graham, you think you are smart. You think you can hide behind a corporation. You are destroying my career for a petty grudge. I know you targeted me. We need to meet. Now, if you do not retract that data, I will sue you for everything you have. I will bury you." I looked at the message. It was the lashing out of a trapped animal. He wasn't worried about the law. He was worried about the narrative. He wanted to bully me into submission, because that was the only tool he had ever learned to use. I did not reply to his threat. I did not defend myself. Instead, I opened the browser on my iPad and scrolled down to the bottom of the article. I found the quote Elena had used as the closer. It was something I had told her in the diner, almost as an afterthought. I read it aloud to the empty room. "Transparency does not kill anyone. It only kills things that live in the dark." It looked even better in print. I went back to the group chat, the one titled Easter Brunch Planning. The last message was Brooke's photo of the invitation. I typed 3 words. "Tessa, Happy Easter." Then I went to the group settings and hit Leave Conversation. I put the phone down. The screen went black. For a few minutes, I just sat there. I knew it wasn't over. In fact, the real war was just beginning. Graham would not go down quietly. Ridgewell and Sloan had a war chest of millions of dollars to fight legal battles. They would come for my credibility. They would try to paint me as a disgruntled, jealous dropout who manipulated the data to settle a score. My parents would be the first casualties. They would be pressured to pick a side. They would have to choose between the daughter who was right and the daughter who was perfect. And I knew, with a sinking heart, that they would likely choose the one who needed saving. They would choose the victim. They would choose Brooke. Because when people lose control of their image, they panic. And when they panic, they look for something they can control. They couldn't control the Wall Street Journal. They couldn't control the Department of Justice. But they thought they could control me. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. I stood up and walked to the window. The city of Chicago lay spread out before me, a grid of steel and glass. Somewhere out there, in the suburbs, a very expensive brunch was ending in disaster. I smiled, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and prepared for the fight of my life. It was 4 in the afternoon when the doorman buzzed my unit. I was expecting them. In fact, I had been expecting them since the moment I hung up the phone with my mother that morning. Panic does not make people stay still. It makes them mobile. It makes them want to fix things. And in my family, fixing things usually meant cornering me until I agreed to their version of reality. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe and your sister are here, the doorman said. His voice was professional, but I could hear a hint of curiosity. He knew I rarely had guests, and certainly not a delegation that looked like they had just fled a garden party. Send them up, I said. I unlocked the door to my apartment, but I did not stand by it to greet them. Instead, I walked back to the living area. My apartment in River North was a statement of everything they were not. It was industrial, open, and filled with sharp lines and cold surfaces. The floors were polished concrete. The windows were floor-to-ceiling glass looking out over the Chicago River. There were no floral prints, no family photos in silver frames, and definitely no pastel colors. When the elevator doors slid open directly into the foyer, they spilled out like a chaotic splash of paint against a gray canvas. My mother was wearing a pale lavender suit with a matching hat that had slipped slightly to the left. My father was in his seersucker Easter jacket. His tie loosened as if he had been pulling at it for air. And Brooke looked like a beauty queen who had been caught in a rainstorm. Her mascara was intact, but her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was clutching her designer clutch so hard her knuckles were white. They marched into the living room without looking at the view. They did not look at the furniture. They barely looked at me. Does the article mention the partners by name? That was the first sentence out of my mother's mouth. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask if I was safe, considering I had just publicly declared war on a billion-dollar industry. She walked right up to me, her eyes wide and manic, scanning my face as if the answer was written on my forehead. Hello to you too. Mom, I said, leaning back against the kitchen island. I crossed my arms. Would you like some water? You look flushed. Stop it, Tessa, my father snapped. He was pacing the length of my rug, his loafers clicking sharply on the concrete. This is not a game. We need to know exactly what you gave them. The article mentions senior leadership at Ridgewell. Does that include Graham's team? Does it include Arthur Sterling? I watched them, feeling a strange detachment. It was like watching a nature documentary where the predators had suddenly realized they were the prey. I gave them the data. Dad, I said calmly. I gave them the billing codes, the timestamps, and the email chains that linked the consultation fees to non-existent meetings. If Graham's team billed for work they did not do, then yes, they are in the data. Brooke let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She dropped onto my leather sofa, disregarding the fact that her dress might wrinkle. Do you have any idea what you have done? She demanded, her voice shaking. We were at the head table, Tessa, the head table, and then Arthur looked at his phone, and it was like a funeral. People were whispering. Mrs. Gable actually pulled her chair away from me. I imagine that was uncomfortable, I said. Uncomfortable? Brooke stood up again, her hands flying in the air. It was humiliation. You humiliated us. You humiliated Graham. How could you do this? It is like you threw a bucket of mud on me on my wedding day. Actually, I said, my voice dropping an octave, it is more like I turned on the lights in a room where you were all stealing silverware. Do not get high and mighty with me, Brooke spat. You did this to hurt me. You did this because you are jealous that I have a life that makes sense and you have this. She waved her hand vaguely at my apartment, as if my success was a form of leprosy. You threw ash on my face. Tessa, that is what you did. I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had spent 20 years perfecting the art of the backhanded compliment. I looked at the woman who had sat next to Graham while he mocked my career and laughed along with him. Brooke, I said, you have been throwing ash on my face for years. You and Mom and Dad have treated me like a disappointment since the day I chose a major you did not understand. You mocked my work. You mocked my life. You treated me like a stain on your perfect picture." I stepped closer to her. She flinched, just slightly. "I did not throw ash on you today," I said softly. "The wind just changed direction, and what you are feeling now, that is just the blowback of your own choices." My father stopped pacing. He walked over to me, trying to summon the authority he usually commanded at the dinner table. He placed his hands on his hips, a pose designed to intimidate. "All right, that is enough," he said. "We are not here to argue about feelings. We are here to fix this. Now, listen to me. Tessa, I know you think you are doing the right thing, but you do not understand how this town works. Reputation is everything." He lowered his voice, adopting a tone that was meant to be conspiratorial. "I am sure there is a way to handle this," he said. "Graham is a good man. He is young. Maybe he made some mistakes with the billing, or maybe he just signed what he was told to sign. You can control the narrative. Tessa, you are the source." "What are you asking me, Dad?" I asked. "I am asking you to call the Journal," he said. "Tell them there was a context error. Tell them that the data regarding Ridgewell and Sloan was misinterpreted. Just soften the blow for Graham. Give him a lifeline. If you do that, we can weather this." I stared at him. He was asking me to commit perjury. He was asking me to destroy my own credibility, my company's reputation, and the integrity of a federal investigation, all to save the career of a man who had called my life's work a hobby. "You want me to lie," I said. "I want you to protect your family," my mother interjected. Stepping forward, tears were streaming down her face now, ruining her powder. "Is that so wrong? Graham is going to be your brother-in-law. If he loses his license, what happens to Brooke? What happens to their future? You have plenty of money now. Apparently, you can afford to take a little hit, but they cannot." I looked at the three of them. They were so united in their selfishness that it was almost impressive. "Let me ask you a question," I said. I waited until they were all looking at me. "If the Wall Street Journal had not published that article this morning," I said, speaking very slowly, "would you be here right now?" The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC system and the distant wail of a tugboat on the river. They did not answer. They could not answer. If the article had not been published, they would still be at the country club, laughing over mimosas. They would be toasting to Graham's success. They would be telling their friends that Tessa couldn't make it because she was figuring things out. They would not be in my apartment. They would not be asking for my help. I would still be the invisible daughter, the mute button on the family group chat. "That is what I thought," I said. I walked over to the door and held it open. "I am not going to call the Journal," I said. "I am not going to retract a single data point, and I am certainly not going to cover for Graham. If he signed those documents, he knew what he was doing. He is a lawyer, right? He knows the law." "Tessa, please," my mother pleaded, her voice breaking. "Do not be like this." "I am not being anything, Mom," I said. "I am just being the CEO of Clearhaven Analytics, and my company does not fix messes for people who only respect us when they are afraid." "You are cold," Brooke whispered, staring at me with genuine horror. "You are so cold." "I am precise," I corrected. "There is a difference." My father looked at me with a mixture of anger and resignation. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had no leverage. He could not cut me off financially. I was richer than him. He could not shame me socially. I was the one setting the standard. "Come on," he said to the others. "She has made her choice." He walked out the door without looking back. My mother lingered for a second, looking at me as if she wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a curse, but she couldn't find the words. She followed him. Brooke was the last to leave. She stopped in the doorway, clutching her bag. "I hope it was worth it," she said. "I hope being right keeps you warm at night." "It does," I said. "It is actually very cozy." I closed the door. The lock clicked with a finality that echoed through the apartment. I stood there for a moment, leaning my forehead against the cool wood of the door. My heart was racing, but not from guilt. It was the adrenaline of finally, after 34 years, resigning from the job of being their doormat. I walked back to the window and looked down at the street. I saw 3 small figures exit the building and get into a black car. They looked small from up here. They looked insignificant. I turned away from the window and went to the kitchen. I poured out the cold coffee and started a fresh pot. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Nolan. Nolan. Just got a ping from the Department of Justice. They want to schedule a formal deposition for Tuesday. And Ridgewell and Sloan just issued a no comment to the press. We are winning. I smiled. My family had come to ask for a shield. I had sent them away. And now, I was going to sharpen my sword. Tuesday evening came with a heavy, relentless rain that turned the Chicago streets into slick rivers of neon reflections. My phone buzzed at 4 p.m. It was not a text message this time. It was a calendar invite sent from a personal email address I did not recognize, but the name attached to it was unmistakable. Graham Keene. Location, the library bar at the Ambassador, 7 p.m. Subject, settlement. He did not ask if I was free. He did not ask if I wanted to meet. He simply summoned me, as if I were a junior associate who had missed a filing deadline. I accepted the invite, not because I intended to settle anything, but because I needed to look him in the eye. The data I had was damning, but data is cold. I needed to see the human element. I needed to see exactly how scared he was. I arrived at 7:10. I did this deliberately. In Graham's world, being late was a power move. It signaled that my time was more valuable than his. The bar was dimly lit, smelling of old leather, expensive scotch, and quiet desperation. It was the kind of place where affairs were started and corporate crimes were covered up. I found Graham sitting in a booth in the far corner, away from the door. He was wearing a casual blazer, no tie. He looked like he was trying to appear relaxed, like a man meeting an old friend for a drink. But as I approached, I saw the tension in his jaw. He was grinding his teeth. He stood up when he saw me. He even pulled out the chair opposite him. "Tessa," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Thank you for coming. I ordered you a sparkling water with lime. I remember you do not drink when you are working." "I am not working, Graham," I said, sitting down but ignoring the water. "I am existing, but I appreciate the gesture." He sat down and clasped his hands on the table. He looked at me with an expression that was almost pitying. It was a look designed to make me feel small, to make me feel like the irrational little sister who had stumbled into a room full of adults. "Look," he started, leaning forward. "Sunday was unfortunate. Tensions were high. Brooke was emotional. I think we all said things we did not mean." "I meant every word I said," I replied. "And I suspect the Wall Street Journal did too." Graham chuckled softly. It was a hollow sound. "The media loves a sensational story. Tessa, you know that. They take a few data points and spin a narrative, but that is not why I asked you here. I am not here to argue about the article." "Why are you here?" I asked. "I am here to offer you a path forward," he said. "For the family, for Brooke." He paused, waiting for me to soften at the mention of my sister's name. When I remained impassive, he continued. "I have spoken to some people, powerful people. They are willing to overlook this little outburst, but we need the data flow to stop. You need to tell the regulators that your initial findings were preliminary, that the model needs recalibrating." I stared at him. "You want me to lie to the Department of Justice?" "I want you to slow down," Graham corrected. "Just for a few months. Give the industry time to adapt. These billing practices, they are industry standard. Tessa, they are how big firms operate. If you tear it all down overnight, you are going to cause a market crash. Innocent people will lose jobs. Paralegals, secretaries. Do you want that on your conscience?" "That is a very noble speech," I said. "But the data does not show an industry standard. It shows a criminal enterprise." "It shows complexity you do not understand," Graham snapped. His voice rose, cracking the veneer of politeness. He looked around quickly to see if anyone had heard, then lowered his voice to a hiss. "You are an outsider, Tessa, you do not understand how client retention works. You do not understand the leverage required to close a deal. I understand math, I said. And I understand that when you bill a client for 26 hours in a single day, you are stealing. Graham sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Fine. You want to play hardball. What do you want? Is it money? Clearhaven is doing well, but I know startup costs are high. Ridgewell has a discretionary fund for external consultations. We could bring you on as an advisor, a very well-paid advisor. You could help us fix our billing internally. I felt a cold disgust rise in my throat. He was trying to buy me. He was trying to turn me into one of them. Is that why you are terrified? I asked softly. Because you think everyone has a price? I am not terrified, Graham scoffed. I am being pragmatic. No, I said. You are terrified because the data does not just show overbilling at your firm. It shows overbilling specifically on your cases. Graham froze. The ice in his glass clinked as his hand shook. I do not know what you are talking about, he said. I think you do, I said. I leaned forward, mirroring his posture. I looked closer at the files after you threatened me on Sunday. I found something interesting. There is a recurring vendor in your case files, a company called K3 Strategic Partners. You authorized payments to them on 12 different mergers, about $200,000 per transaction. Graham's face went pale. It was not a gradual change. It was instant. The blood drained from his skin, leaving him looking gray and waxy. That is a legitimate third-party vendor, he stammered. They do market research. Do they? I asked. Because I ran a background check on the incorporation documents. K3 is registered in Delaware, but the signatory is a shell company in the Cayman Islands. And do you know who is listed as the beneficiary of that shell company? I waited. I let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. I did not find your name, I whispered. I found your brother's name, Elias Keene. Graham slammed his hand on the table. You have no right to dig into my family. You brought my family into this when you made my mother cry in my lobby, I said. But here's the thing, Graham. I have not released that information yet. That is not in the Wall Street Journal. That is sitting on my private server. He was breathing hard now. His eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a lawyer, looking for a way out. You cannot prove anything, he said. That is circumstantial. You do not have the bank records. I do not need the bank records, I said. I have the invoices. I have the metadata showing that the invoices from K3 were created on a laptop registered to you. You wrote the bills for your own brother's shell company. Graham, you were funneling client money directly into your own pockets. You are lying, he spat. You are bluffing. You do not have the metadata. The scrubbing protocol would have erased that. The world seemed to stop. I sat back in my chair. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. The scrubbing protocol, I repeated. Graham's eyes widened. He realized what he had said. He realized he had just walked off a cliff. I never mentioned a scrubbing protocol, I said. And I never mentioned that the files were scrubbed. In fact, the only way you would know there was a scrubbing protocol is if you tried to delete the evidence. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping on a dock. But more importantly, I continued, the term scrubbing protocol is not an industry term. It is a specific file naming convention used by the IT department at Ridgewell, and it appears in a folder that I encrypted, a folder that I named Project Icarus internally. Graham swallowed hard. I surmised it. No, I said. You did not surmise it. You slipped up. You mentioned the scrubbing protocol because you have seen my files. You, or someone you hired, tried to hack into Clearhaven's servers last night. We traced the intrusion, but we could not pinpoint the user, until now. I picked up my phone and opened the voice memo app. It had been recording since I walked in. I tapped the screen to stop the recording. That was the confirmation I needed, I said. Graham looked at the phone with pure horror. You cannot use that, he whispered. Illinois is a two-party consent state. You cannot record me without my permission. I am not going to use it in court, I said, standing up. I do not need to. I already have the evidence of the embezzlement. This recording? This is just for me. This is just so I never forget the moment you realized you were done. Tessa, wait, he said, reaching out to grab my wrist. I pulled back sharply. Do not touch me. Please, he said. His voice was broken now. The arrogance was gone. The fake polish was stripped away. If this comes out, if the partners find out about K3, I will go to prison. Not just disbarred, prison. You should have thought about that before you stole $3 million from your clients, I said. Think about Brooke, he pleaded. She loves me. If you destroy me, you destroy her. She will never forgive you. Brooke fell in love with a successful lawyer, I said. She fell in love with a suit and a title. She does not know who you are. And frankly, Graham, I am doing her a favor. It is better she finds out now than 5 years from now when the FBI is knocking on her door. I can pay you, he whispered. I have money stashed. I can give you half. I looked at him with profound pity. He still did not get it. He still thought this was a transaction. He still thought the world operated on the principle of greed because that was the only fuel he had ever burned. I do not want your money, Graham, I said. I make my own money, and I make it honestly. I threw a $20 bill on the table to cover the sparkling water I had not touched. You asked me if I was afraid of hurting your career. I said, I am not. You built your career on quicksand. It was going to sink eventually. I leaned in close, so he could hear the steel in my voice. You are not afraid I'm going to ruin your reputation, I said. You are afraid that I am going to show the world exactly who you are, a thief in a custom suit. I turned and walked away. Tessa, he called after me, his voice rising in panic. Tessa, you cannot leave. We have a deal. We have to have a deal. I did not look back. I walked out of the dark, suffocating bar and out into the rainy Chicago night. The air felt clean. The rain felt like a baptism. I hailed a cab and got in. Where to? The driver asked. River North, I said. And hurry. I have a phone call to make. I took out my phone. I did not call the Journal. Not yet. I called the number for the lead investigator at the Department of Justice who had reached out to me that morning. This is Tessa Monroe, I said when he answered. I have new information regarding the Ridgewell case, specifically regarding a shell entity named K3, and I think you are going to want to issue a subpoena for Graham Keene's personal laptop. As the cab merged onto Lakeshore Drive, I watched the city lights blur past. I knew my family would hate me for this. I knew Brooke would scream and my mother would cry. But for the first time in my life, their anger did not feel like a weight. It felt like the inevitable cost of doing business. Graham Keene was not just a bad fiancé, he was a criminal, and I was done letting him hide behind the family crest. The morning after I walked out on Graham, the silence in my apartment was shattered not by police sirens, but by the relentless, vibrating demand of my mother's ringtone. I had barely slept. The adrenaline from the confrontation at the Ambassador had kept me pacing the length of my living room until 3 a.m. I kept replaying the sound of Graham's voice when he realized he had incriminated himself. But now, in the cold light of Wednesday, the reality of the emotional fallout was setting in. I picked up the phone on the 5th call. I did not say hello. I just pressed the button and held it to my ear. Tessa! My mother's voice was ragged, sounding as though she had been crying for hours. Thank God. Why haven't you been answering? Do you have any idea what is happening over here? I have a vague idea. Mom, I said, leaning against the kitchen counter and staring at the coffee machine. I assume the Keene family is not pleased. Not pleased? She practically shrieked. They are threatening to cancel the engagement party. Margot called me at 7 this morning. She said, "Oh, Tessa, it was humiliating." She said they cannot have their family name associated with ours as long as you are waging this vendetta. It is not a vendetta, I said wearily. It is a fraud investigation. They do not care what you call it, she cried. They are demanding that Brooke make a choice. Margot said that unless Brooke publicly distances herself from you, unless she issues a statement saying she does not support your actions, then the wedding is off. They are holding my daughter hostage because of you. They are holding her hostage because they are manipulators, I corrected. Can't you see that? They are using Brooke as a shield. They want me to back off. So they are threatening the one thing they know matters to you, the wedding. You have to fix this, my mother pleaded. Her voice dropped to a desperate whisper. Please, Tessa, I am begging you. Just meet with Margot and Bill. Go to their house. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you respect Graham. Just say whatever you have to say to smooth this over. I closed my eyes. You want me to apologize to the people who stole from my clients? You want me to apologize to a man who threatened to bury me? I want you to save your sister's happiness, she sobbed. Why is that so hard for you? Why do you always have to be so rigid? Can't you just swallow your pride for one afternoon? It is not pride. Mom, I said, my voice quiet. It is the law, and I am not going to break it to save a party. I hung up before she could say anything else. My hand was shaking. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a profound, hollow ache. She did not care if I was right. She did not care if I was safe. She only cared that the picture-perfect wedding was in jeopardy. A moment later, the text message arrived. It was from Brooke. Brooke, Mom says you refuse to talk to the Keens. I cannot believe you. If you love me, Tessa, if you have ever loved me, you will fix this. You need to call the Journal. Tell them to issue a correction, or at least put out a statement saying that your data does not specifically target Ridgewell and Sloan. Please, I am begging you, do not destroy my life. I stared at the screen. Do not destroy my life. She truly believed that was what I was doing. She saw herself as the protagonist of a tragedy, and I was the villain burning down her castle. She couldn't see that the castle was built on a sinkhole. I typed a reply. I didn't want to argue about the data anymore. I wanted to ask the one question that had been haunting me since Sunday. Tessa, I have a question for you. Brooke, in the 2 years you have been with Graham, every time he made a joke about my job, or called me a failure, or treated me like a charity case, did you ever once tell him to stop? Did you ever once tell him to respect your sister? I watched the 3 little dots appear, then disappear, then appear again. She was hesitating. She was rewriting history in her head, trying to find a moment where she had defended me. Finally, the answer came. Brooke, you are deflecting. You always do this. You make everything into a war about how mistreated you are. Graham was just joking. He has a dry sense of humor. You are just too sensitive. Too sensitive. That was it. That was the summary of our entire relationship. My pain was never real to her. It was just an inconvenience. My success was never real to her. It was just a fluke. I decided then that I was done protecting her from the reality of the man she was sleeping next to. I opened my photo gallery. I found the screenshot I had saved days ago. The anonymous email sent from the encrypted server. The one that threatened my safety and mentioned her wedding. I also attached a screenshot of the forensic log from my security team. The one that traced the IP routing of that threat back to a digital signature associated with Graham's personal devices. I sent both images to Brooke. Tessa, this is not a war I started. This is an email I received 3 days ago threatening me. Look at the timestamp. Look at the content. We know where your sister is getting married. Graham sent this. Brooke, he threatened your wedding before I even published the article. He used you as leverage to try and silence me. I waited. My heart was pounding against my ribs. Part of me, the part that still remembered playing dolls with her on the living room floor, hoped that this would be the wake-up call. I hoped she would call me, horrified. I hoped she would ask if I was safe. I hoped she would say, "Oh my God, he is a monster." The phone buzzed. Brooke, are you serious? I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. She was shocked. Good. But then the second message came. Brooke, you expect me to believe Graham sent this? This looks like something you typed up yourself. Anyone can fake an email. Tessa, are you sure you didn't create this just to play the victim? You are so desperate to make him look like the bad guy, so you do not have to feel guilty about ruining us. I read the words once, then twice. I felt a physical sensation in my chest, like a rib snapping. It wasn't just denial, it was active malice. Brooke wasn't just brainwashed, she had made a choice. She had invested so much of her identity into being the perfect future wife of a successful lawyer that she was willing to rewrite reality to keep that identity intact. To her, it was more plausible that I was a sociopath who forged death threats against myself than that her fiancé was a criminal. If she admitted I was telling the truth, she would have to admit that she had engaged herself to a predator. She would have to admit that her entire life plan was a lie, and she was too weak to do that. So, she decided I had to be the liar. She needed me to be the villain. It was the only way her world made sense. I lowered the phone. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The sister I thought I was saving didn't exist. She was gone, consumed by the image she worshipped. I sat there in the silence, feeling a strange, cold clarity. The grief was gone. It was replaced by a sharp, metallic resolve. I was done trying to save my family. You cannot save people who are holding on to the anchor and screaming that it is a life raft. Knock, knock. I looked up. Nolan was standing in the doorway of my office. I hadn't even heard him come in. He was holding a laptop and wearing a tie, something I had not seen him do in 5 years. "You okay?" he asked, looking at my face. "You look like you just watched a ghost die." "Something like that," I said, putting my phone face down on the desk. "What is with the tie?" "We got a call," Nolan said, walking over and setting the laptop down in front of me. "From the Oversight Board and the State Bar Association." My ears perked up. And they are not asking for a comment anymore, Nolan said, a grim smile playing on his lips. "They are convening an emergency review panel. They want us to present the methodology tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. "They want the technicals?" I asked. "They want everything," Nolan confirmed. "They want to know exactly how the algorithm flags the duplicate billing. They want to see the chain of custody on the documents. They want to know if the model is unimpeachable." He paused, his eyes serious. "Ridgewell's lawyers are going to be there," he said. "They are bringing their own experts to try and debunk the code. They are going to argue that our data is flawed, that we misinterpreted the logs, that we are just a couple of techies who don't understand legal nuance. They are going to try to break the model." I looked at the laptop. I looked at the code that Nolan and I had spent nights sleeping on the floor to perfect. I looked at the system that my family had called a hobby. Brooke thought I was waging a war. She had no idea. The skirmishes were over. The real war was about to start in a conference room with glass walls. "Let them try," I said. I stood up and walked over to the whiteboard where we had mapped out the investigation. I erased the section labeled Family Management. I wiped away Mom, Dad, and Brooke. I watched their names disappear into white dust. "We are not going to just show them the code," I said to Nolan, my voice steady and hard. "We are going to run a live simulation. We are going to feed Graham's past 5 years of billing data into the system right in front of them. We are going to let the algorithm catch him in real time." Nolan grinned. "That is aggressive. I love it." "I am done being the little sister," I said. "I am done being the daughter who didn't fit in. Tomorrow, I am not Tessa Monroe. The disappointment. Tomorrow, I am the expert witness." I picked up my coffee. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. "Get the deck ready," I ordered. "And make sure we have the backups on an air-gapped drive. If they try to crash our system during the demo, I want to be able to reboot in 30 seconds. "On it," Nolan said, turning to leave. I looked out the window one last time. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to come around. I was going to put the truth on a screen so big and so bright that they would have to sew their eyes shut to ignore it. And if that destroyed the brunch club, if that ruined the wedding, so be it. The conference room at the State Bar Association was colder than a morgue, and smelled faintly of lemon polish and nervous sweat. On one side of the mahogany table sat the legal team from Ridgewell and Sloan. There were 5 of them. They wore suits that cost more than my first car, and they had the aggressive, bored posture of men who were used to bullying problems until they disappeared. On the other side sat me, Nolan, and our own counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah who specialized in whistleblower protection. The lead lawyer for Ridgewell, a man named Mr. Vance, stood up. He adjusted his cufflinks and looked at the panel of 3 oversight commissioners with a weary smile. "Commissioners," Vance said, his voice dripping with condescension, "what we have here is a classic case of misinterpretation. Ms. Monroe is a data scientist, not a lawyer. She sees patterns where there are simply nuances of legal strategy. Her algorithm is flawed because it does not understand the human element of counsel." He turned to me. "It is a black box, isn't it, Ms. Monroe? You feed data in, magic happens, and accusations come out. We cannot verify your methodology." I stood up. I did not smile. I did not adjust my clothes. I plugged my laptop into the HDMI cable. "It is not magic, Mr. Vance," I said. "It is math, and unlike legal strategy, math does not have nuance. It only has truth." I signaled to Nolan. He hit the enter key. On the massive screen behind me, a complex visualization bloomed. It showed the flow of money, millions of dollars moving from client accounts into the firm, and then splintering off into the shell companies I had identified. "This is not a black box," I told the panel. "This is an open ledger. I am giving you the source code right now." For the next 2 hours, I dismantled them. I walked the commissioners through the blind fee structure. I showed them how Ridgewell attorneys would bill for a document review on a Tuesday, while the metadata on the document server showed the files had not been opened since the previous Friday. I showed them the identical billing narratives, paragraphs of text copied and pasted across 50 different client invoices, down to the same typo in the word judgment. "Mr. Vance tried to interrupt. He tried to claim attorney-client privilege. He tried to claim data breach. But Sarah cut him off every time. "The data was provided by the client. Mr. Vance, my client is simply the auditor, and the fraud exception to privilege applies here." Then came the kill shot. I pulled up the document Graham had tried to hide. It was a conflict of interest waiver regarding the K3 Consulting Group. It was a document that was supposed to declare that no partner had a financial interest in the vendor. "This document states that K3 is an independent entity," I said. "But here is the digital signature log." I zoomed in. The document was digitally signed by Graham Keene at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, and 18 seconds later, the same user account, Graham Keene, logged into the K3 admin portal to accept the payment. The room went silent. "Mr. Vance looked at the screen. He looked at his junior associates. He closed his folder. He knew it was over. He was not there to save Graham. He was there to see if the firm could survive the impact. And looking at the data, he realized the only way to save the ship was to throw the cargo overboard. By the time we walked out of the building, the second article from the Wall Street Journal had hit the wire. The headline was simple, brutal, and effective. "The Inside Man: How one associate signed the receipts for a multi-million-dollar scheme." Elena had kept her word. She did not frame it as a revenge story. She framed it as a systemic failure with a very specific face, and that face was Graham Keene. The article detailed the K3 connection. It laid out the shell company structure. It did not mention me as his sister-in-law. It simply cited forensic evidence provided to federal regulators. The fallout was instantaneous and absolute. Graham did not just lose his job, he was erased. Before I even made it back to my office, Ridgewell and Sloan issued a press release. They stated that they were shocked and appalled by the actions of a rogue employee. They announced that Graham Keene had been terminated for cause, effective immediately, and that the firm would be fully cooperating with the Department of Justice to make restitution to affected clients. They threw him to the wolves to save the pack. And then, the family turned. I heard the news from Brooke. but not directly. She didn't have the courage to call me. She sent a text message that was so short, so cold. It made me shiver. "Brooke, the wedding is off," Margot called. She said Graham needs to focus on his legal defense and that a union at this time is not in the best interest of the firm's reputation. They took the ring back. Tessa. They sent a courier for the ring. I read the message in the back of a taxi. Not in the best interest of the firm. That was it. That was the love story she had fought so hard to protect. It wasn't a romance. It was a merger. And the moment the stock price of Graham Keene crashed, the merger was canceled. Graham's parents didn't stand by him. They didn't stand by Brooke. They circled the wagons around their own social standing and cut the infected limb loose. Graham was facing federal charges. He was facing disbarment. And he was facing it alone. Because the people he had tried so hard to impress were the first ones to lock the door against him. I did not reply to Brooke. There was nothing to say. She was sitting in the wreckage of a life she had bought with willful ignorance. I hoped, for her sake, that she would finally learn to build something real. But I could not build it for her. That evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. I hesitated. I looked at the screen, debating whether to let it go to voicemail, but something told me this call would be different. "Hello," I said. "Tessa." Her voice was quiet. There was no hysteria this time, no demands, just a heavy, exhausted clarity. "I saw the news. I saw the statement from the firm." "I saw it too," I said. "He stole," she said. It sounded like she was trying the words out for the first time. "He actually stole, and he lied to us, to all of us." "Yes," I said. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing. "I called Brooke," she said. She is broken. Tessa, she is humiliated, but she is alive." "That is good," I said. "Tessa," my mother said, and her voice cracked. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen." "I am listening." "I always thought," she started, then stopped. "I always thought you were the one who was lost. I thought because you didn't follow the path. You were in danger. I thought I had to push you to be like Brooke so you would be safe. I thought safety was looking like everyone else." She took a shaky breath. "I was wrong," she said. "I was so wrong. I treated you like a shameful secret because I didn't understand your world. But the truth is, I didn't understand mine either. I was so proud of a thief in a suit, and I was ashamed of the daughter who was telling the truth." I felt a lump form in my throat. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take time. But it was relief. "Margot Keene called me today," my mother continued. "She tried to blame you. She said you ruined a good family, and for the first time in my life, Tessa, I didn't apologize. I told her that if her son hadn't been a criminal, my daughter wouldn't have had anything to find." I smiled, a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, Mom," I said. "Can we see you?" she asked. "Can you come over for dinner? Just us?" "Not yet," I said gently. "I need time, and Brooke needs time to figure out who she is without a fiancé. But we can talk next week." "Okay," she said. "Okay, I love you. Tessa, I am proud of you, and not just because you are in the paper." "I know," I said. "Good night, Mom." I hung up. I had drawn the line. I didn't demand they grovel. I didn't demand they suffer. I simply demanded that if they wanted access to me, they had to respect the person I actually was, not the person they wished I would be. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Graham was indicted on 14 counts of wire fraud. Ridgewell and Sloan settled with the regulators for a fine of $40 million. But the biggest twist didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in a boardroom. With the settlement money from a defamation suit I threatened against a minor blog, and the massive influx of capital from new investors, I made a move nobody saw coming. I bought the data division of a major competitor, a company that had previously serviced the very firms I had exposed. I integrated their data into Clearhaven, overnight. We became the industry standard. And then, the phone rang. It was the managing partner of a top-tier law firm in New York, a direct rival of Ridgewell. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "we want to hire Clearhaven." To audit your bills? I asked. No, he said. To certify them. We want to put your seal of approval on every invoice we send out. We want to be the firm that clients trust because Tessa Monroe checked the math. I signed the contract 3 days later. I had started as the enemy of the industry. I ended up becoming its conscience. They didn't hire me because they liked me. They hired me because they realized that in the new world I had built, transparency was the only currency that mattered. The future belonged to the clean. 1 year later. Easter Sunday. I walked into my apartment carrying a bag of groceries. The smell of roasting lamb filled the air. Not because I had a caterer, but because Nolan was in my kitchen, wearing an apron that said Code Monkey, trying to figure out how to use a meat thermometer. Sarah, my lawyer, was sitting at the counter pouring wine. 2 of my lead engineers were arguing about Star Wars on the sofa. This was my table. There were no judges. There were no partners. There was no pressure to be correct. There was just loyalty, brilliance, and people who knew exactly who I was and liked me anyway. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Brooke. Brooke, Happy Easter. Tess, I'm going to therapy today. Hard work, but necessary. Hope you are good. I smiled. She was trying. That was all I could ask for. Tessa, Happy Easter. Brooke, keep going. I put the phone down and walked over to the island. Nolan looked up, panic in his eyes. Tessa, the lamb says 140 degrees. Is that done? That is perfect, I said. I looked around the room. I looked at the view of the river, the city that I had forced to tell the truth. I realized then that revenge isn't about destroying the people who hurt you. It isn't about making them cry or watching them lose. That is just a byproduct. True revenge is refusing to become what they wanted you to be. True revenge is succeeding on your own terms, with your own values, and building a life so full and so real that their rejection becomes irrelevant. They had skipped Easter to save their image. I had skipped their Easter to save myself. And looking at the faces around my table, I knew I had made the right trade. All right, everyone, I said, raising my glass. Let's eat. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you listening from right now? It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Please do not forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Like this video if you enjoyed Tessa's victory, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder that the truth always wins. See you in the next one.